Welcome to Conversations with HJM. I'm Lisa Harris-Jones.
And I'm Tommy Tompsett.
And today we have Congressman Anthony Brown, who's the Democratic nominee for Attorney General for the state of Maryland. Thanks for joining us.
That's great to be here with you once again in Ocean City for the Maryland Association of Counties Conference.
Yeah, this time last year we had no idea that you would be running for Attorney General, and here you are winning the Democratic candidacy. Tell us a little bit about what you see. I'm assuming you're going to win. So what do you see yourself in that role as Attorney General?
Sure. Well, look, we're confident but not complacent that we're going to win as well. It was a hard-fought Democratic primary, but we've got a general election, so we'll certainly make sure we're running a responsible campaign. I'm excited about serving as Maryland's next Attorney General. In many ways, you're the chief legal officer. In many ways, you can think about a managing partner in the largest law firm in Maryland, where we represent every state agency, the General Assembly, the governor's office, but we work for the people. So we focus on things like environmental protection, civil rights enforcement, and public safety, which has been one of the biggest issues, certainly on the minds of Marylanders and Americans, probably for the last 2 years coming out of this pandemic.
Yeah. With the general election coming up and having cannabis on the as a referendum for voters to vote on, and the polls showing that it's likely to pass, what does that mean for your office with balancing the law as well as workforce safety, driving, things related to public safety in that manner?
Sure. And look, I think you're right. I think the Maryland voters, just like we're seeing voters around the country, are, I think, going to overwhelmingly support the lawful adult use of cannabis. I certainly need to work with the General Assembly, the governor, the Cannabis Commission to make sure that the regulations that are in place protect safety, public safety, and public health, and that also people are treated fairly and equitably under this new regime. For me, there are at least 3 issues that we have to make sure we get right. One is expungement of records. There are far too many Marylanders who have a record for, the possession of small quantities of marijuana, who have perhaps served time. I think we should just be automatically expunging those records, provided that offense was not in connection with another offense. So expungement, we have to get that right. The second is equity. And that we haven't done well in Maryland. When you look at medical marijuana, and there's a business side to it, right? And there's revenues for the state, but there's also, profits for those who are in this industry. And that's not a bad thing. But what we're seeing is a lack of diversity in who was issued the licenses when it came to medical marijuana. We have to ensure that there's equity in terms of issuing licensing, either for the dispensaries, the growers, and the processors. So that's going to be a big issue. And the third issue is empowerment. And we have to, I think, with the revenues that will come to the state, we've got to be able to create a fund to invest in those communities who are most impacted by the war on drugs, the war on marijuana, the failed war on marijuana, and make sure that we're invested in those communities. I think about many communities in Baltimore City, Prince George County, and elsewhere around the state, much like we did when we did expanded gaming. The revenues that came to the state, a small percentage was carved out, and it was reinvested into these communities most impacted.
I want to stay with public safety and kind of pivot to gun safety if I can. A few weeks ago, there was just a really tragic story out of Baltimore City where a 9-year-old was able to get his hands on a loaded handgun. He unfortunately took the life of a 14-year-old. The General Assembly for years is debating Jalen's law, where you need to have your gun secured, unloaded, and inaccessible to children under the age of 18. Right now in Maryland, you can have that gun loaded, and it's only for children under the age of 15. Do you support ideas like Jalen's law, and are there other ideas that you may have as the next Attorney General that could help with the gun safety problem that we seem to be having?
Yeah, I most certainly do. And when you look at the direction that the country's going in, this most recent decision by the Supreme Court overturning New York's concealed carry law, which now is really changing Maryland's concealed carry law, where we're going from a may issue to a shall issue. We're going to see more and more guns in our communities, in homes, and on the streets. So I certainly support all measures where we can certainly protect someone's Second Amendment rights, but also ensure that the public is safe from the increased number of guns that are going to be in our homes and our communities. So what does that mean? Sure, safe storage. And I remember when I was in the Maryland General Assembly back in 1999, we were debating trigger locks and how to incorporate technology, require manufacturers to incorporate more technology in terms of when a weapon is hot or cold, whether it's ready to fire or not, because you can purchase a weapon lawfully, yet it can still do unintentional harm and death, as we see in this case recently, and you see regularly where, particularly when minors who just don't have an awareness of the lethality of the weapon, they're certainly rarely familiar with how to use the weapon, yet they have access to it because of the failure to store it properly. So I think we need to increase the age. I think we need to make more strict the requirements for storage, and I think we ought to be working either with manufacturers or without to make sure that they're incorporating more technologies so that firearms are safer.
This past session, legislation was passed to essentially give women here in Maryland more protections with their right to choose. And in light of the Supreme Court essentially overturning Roe v. Wade, do you think that you as Attorney General in your office will have any role with maybe possibly looking at some more protections in the Constitution here in Maryland moving forward to protect a woman's right to choose here in Maryland?
I testified this past legislative session in Annapolis in support of Speaker Jones' proposal or bill that would enshrine Roe versus Wade in the Maryland Constitution, would have sent it to referendum. Having said that, Maryland has a really good framework to protect a woman's right to choose. Back in 1992, we enshrined Roe versus Wade into statute, which is the force of law. But I think in order to not only send a message that Maryland is going to honor and protect a woman's right to choose, whether you base it on privacy or liberty, I think when we put it in the Constitution, that's a really strong statement, and it prevents the ability to chip away at that, right? And what do I mean by that? 50 years ago, we never thought that Roe versus Wade would be overturned by the Supreme Court, right? It's a right that women have now enjoyed for the last 50 years. I don't want to see a Maryland 50 years from now where our protections are chipped away at because we did not put it into the Maryland Constitution. So I will certainly work with the General Assembly. It'll be there, obviously a policy decision by the General Assembly and the governor. But as Attorney General, I will certainly provide them the advice. And I see no impediments whatsoever, certainly legal impediments, to passing a bill that would send it to referendum for the Marylanders to vote. So certainly we want to do that. We need to make sure we continue funding the services, particularly for low-income women, for reproductive health services, including abortion. I think that, we all, I think, agree that health care is a right, and part of health care is reproductive health. So I think that's a fundamental right to a woman has to reproductive health services. And not only to fund services for women living in Maryland, but as we've already seen, there are many women coming from Texas and Oklahoma, other states, where that right is restricted, if not altogether banned. So we need to be prepared to support women who come to Maryland. And it's very disappointing that the governor is withholding funds, the funds that the General Assembly appropriated that would be used to train providers in delivering those services. Look, if we're going to provide those services in Maryland, you want trained professionals to be able to do that, and that $3.5 million was important, yet the governor withheld it.
I'm going to go back to public safety for just 1 second. So juvenile justice, we've done a lot here in Maryland to reform that system, everything from how we interrogate a juvenile to how they actually move through the system, taking a much more nuanced approach, recognizing that brain development usually occurs later than we expect with children. And so do you think we've gone far enough with regards to juvenile justice reform? especially in the backdrop of what seems to be increasing juvenile crime in our state.
Yeah, look, I'm pleased to see that the General Assembly is focused on it. They're making some progress. I think there's more work to be done. For example, there was a bill in the General Assembly this session, which I support. Certainly we need to take a close look at, and that would be, for example, if a child commits a misdemeanor that does not involve a gun, I don't think that we should necessarily incarcerate them. I think we're over-incarcerating children. You know, when they do bad things, we call them juveniles. They're still children, and we should treat children like children, particularly, again, when it's not a felony, when it doesn't involve a gun, because data shows that when you incarcerate a child, even for a short period of time, it is much more likely that they are going to be a lifelong offender. So we need to treat children like children, get them the mental health services that they need, the services that their families need to support this child. I supported the reforms in the interrogation methods and the prohibition on doing that unless their parent is available or they have counsel. I think the next step is looking at things like, not incarcerating them for misdemeanors.
I know that you have a busy day. We're here down at the Maryland Association of Counties conference, and so we don't want to keep you long. Is there anything that you want to share with our viewers before you leave us?
Yeah, look, I'm excited about the opportunity to serve as Maryland's next Attorney General, and whether we're focusing on environmental protection or public safety, whether we are focusing on labor standards or civil rights, this office will do everything, every decision that we make and position we take will be focused on equity, inclusion, and diversity. Maryland is now the fourth most diverse state in the nation, the most diverse state east of the Mississippi, or Mississippi River. And I want to make sure that the office reflects the diversity of Maryland and that the decisions we make are equitable and fair for all Marylanders.
After November, we'll have our first black Attorney General, first black governor. We'll have Derek Davis as treasurer, our first woman controller for the state of Maryland, sitting there at the Board of Public Works. What does that mean to you, and what does that mean to Marylanders?
Look, I'm excited. Remember, I ran for governor in 2014, and I think it's long overdue that we now have an African American who is this close to being our next governor, the first African American governor. And to have a woman, first constitutional officer in Maryland elected, it's fantastic. When I look at the leadership team, including the presiding officers, this is a team of public servants who I think we're like-minded, but not of one single thought. We work well together. Mm-hmm. We're going to disagree on things, no doubt, but I don't see among us anyone who's disagreeable. So I think it's going to be a really great opportunity for Maryland, and we're going to make a lot of progress together.
Yeah, and I love that Speaker Jones was a great champion during the primary election, supporting you, supporting Democratic nominee Wes Moore, Brooke Lehrman.
She went 3 for 3.
I know. So I'm excited for November.
Yep.
Well, thank you for joining us. And thank you for joining us with Conversations with HJM.